breaking out of the sea of sameness, which a lot of people find themselves in, requires you to say and do things differently. One simple thing you can do is to lead with the problem and not the product. I say, like, people don't care about what it is that you do or your product, because even if it's really cool and differentiated and it uses AI, no one cares. Okay, like, everyone sits there thinking about their own problems all day, every day.
Welcome to Relationship Capitalists, where super connectors share how they build trust, create value, and thrive when AI changes everything. In a world where expertise is being commoditized, your ability to build and sustain high-value human connections is what sets you apart. I'm your host, Jason Masciarelli. Let's dive in. Welcome to Relationship Capitalists. I'm your host, Jason Masciarelli. Today, I'm joined by David Priemer, founder and chief sales scientist at Cerebral Selling, best-selling author of Sell the Way You Buy and The Sales Leader They Need, and a lecturer at Queen's University and London Business School. David began as a research scientist before building a 20-year sales career across startups and Salesforce. So today, we explore how modern B2B sales can win trust, create urgency, and build relationships in a market full of distractions and choice. Let's dive in. So before we dig in, I'd love to have you just kind of share a bit about the mission that you're on today with Cerebral Selling, or if there's something else that you've got going on, and really, kind of who you're helping and what you're really out there trying to do in terms of help the world.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I could be in a room full, let's say, of 1,000 salespeople, and I ask them a simple question. I say, let me ask you this. Do you like talking to salespeople? Right? And then no one raises their hand. Then we ask, why do you think that is? And so, in a world where there's now AI, people are infinitely more distracted than ever before, budgets are really tight, being able to break through, as a salesperson and drive revenue for your company is harder than ever before, especially in a world where people don't want to talk to you. So I'm on a mission to help people break out of the sea of sameness and connect with their customers in a way that makes them feel human and authentic and drives those relationships, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Love it. That's awesome. And what types of businesses do you work with? So typically, is it companies or individuals?
So mostly companies. Most of my clients, because I came from a B2B technology background, a lot of my clients are in B2B technology, but I have a lot of clients that are outside that, from manufacturing, financial services, advertising, marketing, and so on. But yeah, I love the B2B tech space. It's where I grew up, and it's exploding with so many solutions. So in many ways, it's a lot harder than it used to be. So that's where I spend a lot of time.
And so you refer to it as really being more of a science, and what made you realize that versus just being scripts and tactics?
Yeah, well, I started my career as a research scientist, and then I got into sales by accident at the turn of we were talking about timelines, probably around the same time as you, at the turn of the dot-com boom, like 1999, 2000. And I fell in love with sales because to me, it was almost like an engineering problem. When you say things to people like this, they get it. But when you say it a little bit different, they don't, right? And so I just became really curious about the pathways and mechanisms behind which human beings make purchasing decisions. But the secret was, while I love sales, I also hate, I'm saying this as a quiet part, I hated talking to salespeople. And so what I tried to do was to learn the art and science of modern selling and then teach it, through these pathways and mechanisms so people can just, be authentic, be human. And that's where it started for me. So I'm just a naturally curious kind of sales-minded person, science-minded person. And I just happened to apply that to sales over the last, 26 years.
That's awesome. And I think when I think of science, I think of very specific, actions and things that I would have to do. And so it's interesting that you combine science with being more human and more authentic, and those pathways. Kind of talk a bit about that, because I would have trouble reconciling that, because I'd be okay, I'm being very methodical and scientific versus being very human and, myself and authentic.
Yeah. Well, so, when I say scientific, it doesn't mean I'm treating, the sales process like a surgery where I'm kind of going from step to step, and making the person feel like I'm politely interrogating them and that they're being put through an operation. That's not the objective. However, when you think about sales, you don't need a degree. There's no certification. Anyone could be in sales. And so what happens is we just end up learning sales from, I'm going to make a historical reference from our sensei. I talk about in my book, Sell the Way You Buy, I talk about the Karate Kid. I love the Karate Kid, growing up, the movie from 1984. And who you choose to learn from, as your sensei, influences who you turn out to be. And so a lot of times in sales, the tactics that we use are really not rooted in anything other than what we were just taught to do. So, when you have a crappy, car buying experience because you're working with a dealership, the salesperson is probably not a bad person. They're a good person. They have families, they have friends that love them, but they just go out and they use these tactics that are really rooted in nothing other than this is the way we've always done it. And so my thing is like, take a step back and think about, again, like how people actually make those decisions. Like what happens in their mind when you say this thing versus that thing? Like even things like the fact that nowadays people buy products and services, not even just based on the intrinsic properties of that thing, but based on the experience they have working through that sales process with that company. And so even recognizing that, the experience is the product in many ways is a product of science. Like this is how people think. Right. So it's not executing in a very sterile, impersonal way. It's just appreciating, taking a step back and saying like, why do we do this? Why do we say it like this? Why when we try to close a business at the end of the month, like, why are we putting pressure on clients like the way we've always done it? If it's putting them off, that's what I mean by kind of like the science.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And so over your career, obviously you've sharpened your, concepts around this. And so where do you see that it works in terms of building trust? And where does it work against a salesperson?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So in my practice, I talk about, selling. And I also have a part of my practice in a book that focuses entirely also on sales leadership. And both a salesperson and a sales leader in many ways are in the same business, which is behavior change. We're talking to customers or team members, and we're trying to get them to do things differently than what they've done in the past. We're trying to kind of disrupt their inertia, to use like a physics term. And the idea is like, if I have a good relationship with someone, why is, rapport relationship is important is because that relationship enhances the absorption of ideas. If you like me, if we have a good relationship, then you're more likely to take any advice or anything I say to you in the best possible way. I give this as an example. Like, let's say you're a kid and you're running out of your house and your mother like grabs you by the scruff of your neck and like drags you back. She's like, you're not going out there, dressed like that. Go up and change your shirt and brush your hair. And you take that because you know that your mother loves you and has your best interest in mind. And so your mother can be very direct with you, and some people, I kind of subscribe to like the radical candor, side of things with Kim Scott, like this idea, like if you care about someone, you can challenge them directly. And the same thing happens in sales and in leadership. If I have a good relationship with someone, then they're more likely to take the things that I'm asking them to do or say in a positive way. It is the gateway to the absorption of ideas.
And likely they've earned it as well, not just because of position.
Correct. Yes. There's Simon Sinek talks about this a lot, like the difference between positional authority. And he's like, look, there's a lot of people who are at the bottoms of organizations. He talks about this in his TED Talk, that are not positionally leaders, but they're emotional leaders because people would follow them, right? Because they built those relationships. So important.
Yeah, that's cool. And so what was kind of the aha moment? So, working for tech companies, in sales leadership roles, and then now like, okay, great, I've got a calling to go write a book and create your own business around this and help people do this. Well, what was kind of the flip for you?
Yeah, like, I say it happens gradually. I don't know, I've been having this conversation with a lot of people lately. My kids are now old enough where, I can see them and I can see like at 20 years old, they're exactly the same as they were when they were 4. I can just keep watching the old videos, you know what I'm saying? It's the same things that they've always done, they have always been. And I was having that conversation with my parents. They said, like, what I do now, people say, why would you go to school for all these years just to end up in sales? I did graduate work, I was a research scientist. And I say, no, like I use, everything that I learned in my career as a research scientist in my career today, every day. But going back as a kid, like I was the same. I would like take apart, electronic devices. I'd put together models. I was just always very curious about like how things ticked. And so, when you think about like your career and how it grows, in many ways, I've always been doing this, And so over the course of time, when I was at Salesforce, We didn't talk about this. So my company, my third startup was acquired by Salesforce. So I came over with the ship to Salesforce. I used to run small business sales for the Eastern US at Salesforce. And while I was there, I would start to teach my reps some of these tactics. Just, hey, look, I want you to be successful. I would start doing this stuff. And Salesforce encouraged me to write and share some of my tactics. And so I started to write for the Salesforce blog. And the content ended up getting picked up by like Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine. So like, this is great. I should keep doing this. So I kept writing. And even when I left Salesforce, I kept writing. And years later, I had all of this content and no website. So I just said, you know what? I should just start a website just to have a place I can send people. And so I started my website, which was called Cerebral Selling, which is now the name of my business. I put all of my content there, and people started to subscribe. And I just said, you know what? This is obviously what I've loved to do. It's the thing I've been doing for free, off to the side for years. This should be my job. And so I decided to, 9 years ago, that this should be my job. And I did.
That's awesome. I love the combination of kind of organically it coming together, but also being rooted in kind of who you are as a person as well and your experiences. Yeah. But you landed on science, empathy, and execution. I think that those three things are very interesting. So kind of what got you to kind of get the clarity of those three things?
Yeah, well, like the science was always, okay, like let's just get really curious about, how people make purchasing decisions and we can align our sales motion thusly. The empathy was that even with the right words and the right tactic, you can still execute it wrong, or like you can still do it wrong. And I talk about this in Sell the Way You Buy. We used to teach our reps to do all these tactics all the time. And even with the right words, some customers would get pissed off. They would escalate to customers. They would say, "Oh, let me talk to your boss," and then they have to get on the phone, and they would, whip me a couple times. And I realized that it wasn't just like the words and the tactics; it's how it's delivered. So there's an execution piece to all of this. There's like a finesse. Even like when you're giving a speech, a public speech, I gave a TED Talk less than a year ago. There's a lot wrapped up in the delivery, right? Not just the words. But then there's also like an empathetic component, especially in sales, which is, oftentimes as a seller, we go out and we execute tactics and say things and do things that would never work on us if we were the buyer, right? And so I always tell that to people. I say, like, before you, reach out, you send this note, like, ask yourself, if you were this customer, would you get back to you? Would you respond to that? And if not, like, why are you doing it? The golden rule is a really good litmus test as it relates to sales executions. That's where the three came from: science, empathy, execution.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. It's great. I hadn't heard that before. And as I was diving in before we met here today, I thought that's a cool combination. So it's great to get the depth on it and how it came about. So what do you think today needs to change in modern sales?
I think there's a lot of things going on in modern sales. And this is, I love picking this apart. Because you think, if you're from the outside, you think, oh yeah, like salespeople have always been the same, customers have always been the same. It's just the market. Now there's AI and there's all these different solutions. But that's not the case. We are not the same. The average age of a seller and the experience level you get as an entry-level seller is much less than what it used to be. The average age of a customer in many ways was increasing, and customers were very experienced. Now it's actually the reverse. Now you have a lot of experienced sellers selling to younger customers. Customers younger than them, less experienced than them. They don't care about the same things as before. And then we had the pandemic. And so before the pandemic, it's funny, when I asked my team at Salesforce, I had one-on-ones with all of them when I came into the role. So I had 70 sales reps, and I said, if you had to go back on to day one of your job here and give yourself one piece of advice to sell more, what would it be? And they all said the same thing, which was, I wish I had gone to visit my customers in person sooner, because they realized the whole relationship changed when they met people in person. And then a funny thing happens. Then we have a pandemic. Not only we don't and we can't meet our customers in person anymore, but especially in the technology ranks, people still needed to buy technology. In fact, the pandemic pushed people towards the cloud. And so, a lot of businesses, while some were very hard done by, others took off. And so what happened was people, especially salespeople, started to realize, hey, look, I can be successful and I don't have to meet anyone in person anymore. And then after the pandemic, where that human connection was kind of starved, a lot of teams and reps realized that they didn't even have that skill set anymore. And so it's funny to see now in a world now that's very dominated by AI, and who knows what's going to happen. But I agree. There was a Gartner study that said by 2030, more sales cycles will actually involve a person than they do today. And so in our push to automate and outsource and AI this and that, and automated sequences and just, generic bullshit that people respond with, human beings are becoming more attuned to the authenticity behind your sales motion. And so it'll be very interesting to see where we have, let's say, a younger, less experienced, Salesforce, younger audience, but still craving human connection. It's unlike the world of science. It does change, but not as fast, as the world of sales. Very interesting to see how this all plays out. But in the context of that kind of the relationship capital, you can't underestimate the importance of having those relationships, being able to be good, talking to people in front of people, and not just for hearsay, but actually forming those authentic relationships. That's what I believe is going to be the differentiator, 5-10 years from now, especially in a world where a lot of people just don't have those skills as much as they used to.
I saw a panel recently with the head of go-to-market globally for Lovable. And Lovable, leading AI company, very much product-led growth PLG company. And he said they are leaning into in-person sales so much that his sales team is on flights every week, and they'll go for one meeting just to make a personal connection with an enterprise client. And it was, on one side, I was shocked because I don't see Lovable in that way, but it makes sense because they need to move up market, right?
100%. Well, look, we talked about the absorption of ideas. The other thing that I believe, talked about this for a long time, is the experience is the product. It doesn't matter what you sell because people don't make the best decisions for themselves. I've asked people what percentage, if I were to look in your CRM and look at all of the deals that reach the end of the line with you, how often would you say that customer made the best decision for them? When they went with you, when they didn't go with you, when they did nothing? And people say not most of the time. Most of the time, people do not make the best decisions for them. So then the question becomes, well, then what the hell are they making decisions based on? If not empirically the best decisions for them. And the number one thing is feelings. They just have where does vibe coding come from? It's I just have a feeling about something. And in a world where all of these solutions kind of look and sound the same to me, even if they're not, but they just kind of sound the same, I'm going to make a decision based on, the organization, the company who I have the best experience with.
An emotional kind of response and connection with as well, right?
100%. Look, You think about your telco, your insurance company. When I have a problem with my telco and my internet provider and I have to speak to, it takes me an hour of soul crushing time and being passed around to 3 different people. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter how fast the internet is when it's working. I just hate that experience, and I'm willing to pay more to go work with a different company that I get a better experience from. So I believe that's going to be the new frontier. I mean, I feel it is already, but in a world where there's just so many solutions, the experience will absolutely become the product.
Yeah, and talking about the shift of the pandemic to kind of this kind of communication, I find that what's happened is it's harder to build relationships because everybody's in group calls. So, a seller shows up and there's 5 or 6 people from the client side, and we've kind of lost the ability to do the one-on-one. And I'm curious if you see that, and if you're coaching sellers to try to really make an effort intentionally to not have the group calls and have one-on-one conversations to really build that, and how you do that.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a sales leader at a billion-dollar software company about this very thing. It's that, let's say, for example, in the room, you have an executive and you have a frontline person who cares about what this means for them day to day. And if you just speak to one, you're going to alienate the other. You need to be able to bounce in between, right? But sometimes, getting the vote of the executive or getting the vote of the frontline person or the user has to happen in 2 different conversations, because it's difficult. Even in negotiation, sometimes a leader won't want to negotiate with you in front of their team because they don't want to be seen as weak or giving things away. But if you get them alone, it's a totally different conversation. So yeah, I'm all for not just, separating things out for the sake of doing it, but in a world where now most of these, larger scale deals are multi-threaded and there's multiple stakeholders, the reason why people form these teams is to kind of, have a little bit of blame diffusion, defray, some of the the emotional toll of making the decision. But getting to people individually And speaking to what's important to them is always a good call.
And go-to-market's getting more expensive. Like I think the stat you said, which is I find I haven't heard that one, which is actually more in person and more relationship-based buying is going to happen. I mean, where do you see that kind of going? Because it's so hard for people to break through and get connected with buyers because they're drowning in social media, emails, outreach, so many choices. So how do people stand out and really kind of make that connection, but also build that relationship when people are just so saturated?
It's funny. There's a philosophical question that I often come back to in this instance, and people, you may not like the answer. The question is, when is the best time to plant a tree? And do you know what people say? What's the answer? Do you know the philosophical answer?
I love this one. Yes.
When's the best time, Jason?
20 years ago.
20 years ago. That's right. Yeah. So the idea is like when you need a relationship, you can't immediately manufacture one out of thin air. I mean, I guess in some instances you can, but it's very difficult, right? And so like I do believe in the principle of like reciprocity, adding value, making deposits before you even need anything. And, I try to do that, like even with my content and my books, the idea is like I can hopefully get in people's minds and occupy a little bit of that, mind share headspace, even before I even ask for anything. And in fact, when we were at Salesforce, the highest ROI event that we ran, in a monthly business where everyone's trying to run and gun and like sell stuff, we used to run these intimate executive dinners in a variety of cities. Like we'd go to New York or Boston. And in fact, the secondary cities like Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, like where we didn't even have an office, and we would show up, actually had, some of the bigger impact because we would show up, we would do these dinners. We would not pitch anything. We would not ask for anything. We would just add value. There's a formula I have I have a video on my YouTube channel about the specific formula that we used. But the take-home message was that it was all value, no pitch. And I say it was the highest ROI event that we ran, meaning the amount of revenue that we closed from those deals within 90 days after the dinner was the best investment of our dollars, because we were able to form these relationships, even before we needed them, and we tried to, call in the favor within 90 days, I guess. But, the idea is that, yes, the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago, play the long game, just keep adding value. Because if your quota period's coming up, your quarter, your month end, and all of a sudden I need something from you, it's a hard sell, right? To bring someone from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, right? So keep making those investments. That's what I say.
That's great. That's awesome. So what do you think sales leaders need to model for their teams to kind of build that trust and authenticity versus have their sellers be transactional and lose that empathy and human connection?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things from a modeling perspective. If I see my leader as like an empathetic person who listens, who has my back, people feel and execute better when they're looked after. This is, again, the whole principle behind Simon Sinek's, like, why good leaders make you feel safe. It's like, if I feel that as a person working for a leader, that it's okay for me to be honest, it's okay for me to fail, it's okay for me to learn, as long as, I'm being held accountable for my actions and my outcomes, then I'm more likely to put in the effort, So that's from a specific leadership perspective. I think as well, like the more, pressure as a leader that I put on my team to perform as the high stakes quota period is coming up is problematic because it pushes people to, engage in behaviors that probably don't serve them.
They almost as a become leader, robotic then because they're just trying to get it done. Yeah,
100%. And by the way, like I say as a customer, can you tell when a salesperson is calling you up?
Especially the quota breath, is that what they call it?
Quota breath, yeah, or commission breath. Sometimes people call it. But yeah, I even say this, having worked, at Salesforce and then for Salesforce, I have Salesforce as a client of mine. I work with a lot of their teams now. At the beginning of the year, when you get your new list of accounts, usually it's February 1st, you're at Salesforce, you get your new list of accounts, you start calling into all these companies and you start trying to create that relationship. Oh, hey, it's David. I'm your new, Jason, I'm your new Salesforce sales rep. I just want to call, make sure, like I'm doing an account review, make sure that you're using everything that you paid for and that you're getting the value. And like, keep in mind, like back to the empathy thing, you're probably like the 10th sales rep that this customer has had during their time working with you at Salesforce. they feel that now I have to like explain everything to you again and like break you in. Meanwhile, you're calling me to do an account review, which I feel is like just a thinly veiled, what am I going to sell you this year conversation. So I say like, have some empathy for the people that you're calling. And, your words, your actions, your approach should be informed by not just like this, one-sided view of like, oh, now I have my accounts, or it's the end of the month, end of the quarter, I got to reach out and sell stuff. But them as well, because they can tell, their experience, they know every start of the year I'm going to get this call. And you have to break like through that kind of, pattern interrupt. You have to break that if you want to get them to pay attention to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably almost like a 1 to 5% nuance. Like it's the little bit in terms of tonality, connection, the words you use, and so on, that makes the difference, right?
Yeah, that's the great subtlety of sales, is that, the same words said slightly different pacing, different timing can have very different impact.
Yeah. So for sales leaders or sellers, like, is there like a daily habit that you'd recommend to people that could make them more successful and better at building relationship capital and building those connections quickly, but also maybe they didn't have the 20 years, but they're getting started now. What can they do on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. The thing I think about, and it's not necessarily like a daily thing, but it's a periodic thing, is just asking, okay, how can I add value to my customers? Like, how can I? Let's say you could do this daily. I have a bunch of calls today, and some of those calls are going to be prospecting calls, discovery calls. What can I do on those calls so the other person feels that conversation was really valuable, even if they never buy anything from me, right? That's the idea. Like, it should be so valuable that they want to keep coming back to you. It was interesting. Just before you, I was on a conversation with a sales leader that I was introduced to from a client of mine that was just, a sales rep that was in one of my sales trainings. Said, you know who would like this? My old boss. So he introduces me to his old boss. And then through the introduction, he says, every time I leave a conversation with her, I feel energized. And he doesn't even work for her anymore. And he's been, the conversation's been going. I'm like, that is first of all, an amazing relationship. We should all have leaders that we work with and for that are like that. But I think about that in the context of like the customer conversations that you're having. He leaves those conversations. He said, I leave all those conversations always feeling energized. How do your customers feel like when they leave the conversation with you? And it's not an accident. It's the insights you bring, the attitude, the enthusiasm. They should feel those conversations are valuable, even if they never buy anything from you.
And value, there's so many dimensions to value, right? I mean, it could even be feeling validated or feeling a connection, right? Or heard. It doesn't always have to be a transactional value necessarily.
Correct.
Yeah. Anything that folks you'd advise stop doing in today's selling environment? I'm sure there's tons, but give us one or two.
Yeah, like I feel like, breaking out of the sea of sameness, which a lot of people find themselves in, requires you to say and do things differently. Other than, we talked about the experiences of the product and like focusing on the end-to-end experience. One simple thing you can do, especially if you're pitching, what it is you do to someone who potentially interested in being a customer, is to lead with the problem and not the product. I say, like, people don't care about what it is that you do or your product, because even if it's really cool and differentiated and it uses AI, like, no one cares. Okay, like, everyone sits there thinking about their own problems all day, every day. And so if I can hear from you that you can solve my problem, then I will listen and lean in to the rest of the conversation. But I say it's not even enough just to leading with the problem is important, but you have to lead with like a problem in a much deeper sense. For example, if I was, let's say, a Salesforce sales rep and I was selling a customer and I said, hey, Jason, we help busy CEOs like you reduce costs and improve efficiency. And I say all these like bullshit things that just still sound the same as everyone else. Like, I can tell you really don't know what it is I do every day, right? So like, imagine this. We're both, entrepreneurs now. I get, first of all, my spam folder is a treasure trove of like what not to do, okay? So let's say someone's trying to sell me a virtual assistant service, And they say, oh, David, we speak to entrepreneurs all the time who are overrun with administrative tasks. Like, wouldn't it be great to have an administrative assistant, a virtual assistant come take those tasks off your hands? And the thing that I think about is like, I wouldn't even know where to start. Like, I think in my business, I'm the only one that can do all of these things, and I can't handle any of it. I'm just making this up, but this is what's going on in my head. So imagine if that pitch said, hey, David, you probably get like 1 million pitches from virtual assistant services that say, oh, we can automate A, B, and C. But we work with leaders like you all the time, entrepreneurs who tell us they love this idea of handing tasks off, but they hate the fact that they think that all of the things that they're doing can be done by no one else other than them, and they have no idea where to start even thinking about what to hand off. We can help you with that. So you see, like, the difference, it's not just the problem, it's like going deep on the problem to showcase that you understand that problem at a much more nuanced level, and you're in a position to help that person.
With much greater relevance as well.
100%. So that's, breaking out of the sea of sameness, super important.
So as you reflect on your career, is there one or two relationships that really became a competitive advantage for you, or probably a better way of saying it is maybe someone that, kind of changed the trajectory of your career over the course of it?
Yeah, I'd say like a couple of things. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of the same leaders for a number of years, some over multiple companies, and so having that like longevity is really, really powerful. People that believed in you, who gave an opportunity. Like, I can trace back my career to micro moments that could have gone A or B and they went B, and that opened the door to everything. But I'd say, because this is the advice I give to a lot of people, I'd say the biggest relationship that served me over the course of my career, and this is kind of be a bit of a different take, is the intimate relationship that I have with people who read my content. The idea is that when you connect with someone for the first time, and oftentimes, with me, they're often not strangers. Although I will say the number of people that have reached out and found me through AI, like, oh, David, we found you because we were looking for a trainer, a speaker, this or that, and like we found you through AI, that's definitely increasing. But for most people, they've watched, let's say they watched my TED Talk, or they've read one of my books, or they've read an article, or someone forwarded something to them, and I'm not a stranger to them anymore. And this is the advice I give to so many entrepreneurs is, if you have a point of view on something, you're a consultant, you're a business, like, write it down where it can actually do some good to someone. And I say not just sharing, the act of sharing and reciprocity is very powerful, but crystallizing your knowledge in a written form is something that is difficult, special, requires focus and attention. And it will, writing about something will actually like embolden, yourself in your own mind. It will crystallize your point of view on topics that just talking about it can never do. When you have to even write an article or book, let's start with the article. And you say, like, people are going to read this, and I'm not going to sit there beside them and be able to explain it. They have to get the thesis out of what I'm just writing here. It's a really powerful thing to do. So I say one of the best relationships is not being a stranger right off the bat, by sharing knowledge and content with your audience.
Yeah, that's huge, especially for building up that, delivering value before you meet people, and also building up that trust as well. This was great. I appreciate you taking the time, and this has been fantastic to get to know your perspective and you as a person. And can you just share, for folks that are interested in engaging Cerebral Selling or working with you, what's the best way to contact you? What types of organizations you like to work with? That'd be great.
Yeah, well, you can always email me. I'm just david@cerebralselling.com. But you can always go to the website and contact me through there. I give away tons of content for free. You can also find me on Amazon if you want to check out my books, Sell the Way You Buy and The Sales Leader They Need. So yeah, email, Cerebral Selling. I'm on LinkedIn. Come say hi. All the above.
Awesome. Accessible. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
And that was David Priemer. Today's episode reminded us that modern B2B selling is not about pressure, scripts, or feature dumping. It is about understanding how people actually buy, earn trust, and connect their solution to real pain, purpose, and outcomes. Ultimately, David's work shows that science and empathy belong together in every great sales conversation. To help us grow this community, please take 30 seconds to follow, subscribe, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's the best way to support the show, You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Relationship Capitalists. If today's conversation sparked something for you, the best way to invest in your own relationship capital is simple. Share this episode with one person in your network who needs to hear it. To learn more about how to build and scale your relationship capital through proven frameworks and simple daily actions, visit relationshipcapital.com. And if you haven't already, search for Relationship Capitalists on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Relationship Capitalists is produced by Fane, the B2B podcast agency that grows your business. I'm Jason Masciarelli. Thanks for being here.